Welcome, and thank you for joining us. My name is Claire Topal. I'm Managing Director of Red Tomato Consulting, and I'll be your MC. The focus for this 1-hour webinar is first, to explore sustainability and diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DE&I, in the context of global health system strengthening. Second, we'll announce Takeda's new Global CSR Program Awardees. And third, we'll get to preview the program's next public request for proposals. To formally begin our program, I'm delighted to ask Takako Oyabu, Takeda's Chief Corporate Affairs and Sustainability Officer, to share a few welcome remarks. Takako, the mic is yours.
Hello and welcome. I'm thrilled to be here with you today to discuss how we can advance diversity, equity, and inclusion and help drive sustainability and health system strengthening. One of our global CSR principles at Takeda is to take a long-term view. Our 240-year-old heritage has taught us that it takes time to address systematic issues, and we need perseverance. We also know that we cannot solve global problems alone, and this is why we value partnerships committed to innovation and organizations that value inclusion so no one is left behind. We recognize that the tremendous opportunities that exist in front of us to transform global health for patients, people, and planet extend well beyond our own work. Today, we'll hear from several experts, our partners Bridges to Development, Pathfinder, and Seed Global Health, about the importance of DE&I and health system strengthening, including what challenges and opportunities look like to realize sustainable global health. To ensure we reach more people more effectively and where they are, we need to involve the communities we serve in our dialogues and co-lead on program design and measurement with them. This fosters new perspectives, fuels innovation, and ultimately brings better health to people and a brighter future to the world. This is why we are calling on leaders gathering next week at the UN General Assembly to double down on DE&I, to support and strengthen healthcare systems over the long term and make sustainability real. It is clear to all of us that the stakes have never been higher for the future of our people and our planet. Today, we are also proud to announce our 2022 Global CSR Program Awardees selected by our employees, as well as the launch of our next request for proposal. I look forward to hearing more about our partners' experiences and insights, and to exploring how we can continue to transform global health together. Now, I'm delighted to hand back the floor to our MC.
Thank you, Takako. I am delighted to share our plan for today's program. Our moderator will kick off discussion with some foundation laying remarks, and then she'll lead a 20-minute moderated conversation with 3 fantastic speakers. This will be followed by a 10-minute Q&A with audience members. We'll address questions you post in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Our 2 major announcements will follow. I want to let our audience know that we invite your questions via that Q&A function. And if you see a question you were going to ask or you'd like to emphasize, please upvote it rather than repeating the question. Now let's get started. Today, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Vanessa Carey, CEO of Seed Global Health, as our moderator. Vanessa, who's also director of the Global Public Policy and Social Change Program at Harvard Medical School, has been thoughtfully unpacking these issues and questions for years. You can read more about her unparalleled experience and amazing accomplishments in her full biography. Seed Global Health is also a global CSR program partner. Vanessa, we are so thrilled you are here to guide this panel discussion. Over to you.
Thank you so much for, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on, or even good night, depending on where you are in the world. And I really want to thank Takeda for, one, convening this very important conversation, and also for their leadership and support in really, I think, building a robust community of work and partners who are engaging in global health. And we've been very privileged at Seed to be a partner for several years now with you. And it's been transformative to the impact and the legacy of the work that we have had. So I want to express my gratitude. I do want to just open sort of noting this moment that we are in today. We are at a truly existential moment in time. We are facing a global pandemic. This is already layered on burdens of disease that are pandemics in and of themselves, whether HIV, TB, non-communicable diseases, including cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, ongoing pandemics of maternal mortality, trauma that is unaddressed and from which people are dying unnecessarily. And this is on top of the fact that we are also in a time where there is a huge economic recession, where we have growing population on this earth for whom we need to worry and care and create jobs, and where inequity is growing massively. And the inequity that we are seeing today that has been so exacerbated in the last few years is really rooted in history, in culture, in racism, in a number of old systemic, anthropological, socioeconomic systems that we need to be accountable to as we do our work. And that accountability is critically important because as we discuss, some of our goals as we go into the UN General Assembly this next week, the first sort of in-person convening in 3 years, and we think about this moment, it is going to be really important that we think about how we do things differently. How do we approach our work differently? How do we challenge the status quo to really make sure that we're investing in our human sustainability? And we often talk about what is needed, but we don't talk about how we work. And so a big theme of today is how do we work? How do we approach these problems? How do we create our partnerships? And what are the values that we hold dear and that we manifest every day in our work that are going to allow us to be more effective? These questions have been central to how Seed Global Health, the organization that I run, works. We focus on partnering with governments and public sector institutions to build out a cadre of a well-trained, empowered health workforce that is local and in service to the community, the population, and the problems, really approaching work stemming from a local context. We are in service to our partners, and long-term vested partnership. The priorities of our partners stand front and center to what we do, and having humility in our work every day is critical, because we know we can always learn, we can always do better, we can always be in stronger service to have more impact that is lasting, that is resilient, that is able to really help solve these solutions. And so before we go into this panel, I want to challenge all of you in the audience today and our panelists and those that are participating to think about how can we challenge the status quo, because we need to think about how we do our work better with more equity, more inclusion, to bring the voices forth of the full diversity of those that inhabit this earth so that we can all learn, grow, and build that resilience, because we have found that better way of working. And we have to do that now, because between climate change, between pandemics, between global inequities, between all the crises that we face today, we know we have to be better and more creative in our solutions. So with that, I am really delighted to introduce a very wonderful panel of speakers that includes Dr. Alan Brooks, who is a managing director of Bridges to Development, Ms. Esther Nakazi, who is a journalist and founder of Health Journalists Network in Uganda, and Dr. Tavinda Sarash, who is the president of South Asia and Middle East for Pathfinder International. I want to actually just open, if I can, by asking each of you to briefly introduce yourself and your work with Takeda and also your work in general, and how your work is really at the nexus of health system strengthening, specifically sustainability, diversity, equity, inclusion. I will ask Alan and Tavinda to speak first, and then I'll ask Esther to make some remarks. But I think one of the things that I would just add very quickly is that health system strengthening is absolutely critical to the resilience that we need to see in pandemics. And we've seen in this moment that our failure to fully build out that health system strengthening is part of why we've been losing ground in this pandemic. So if I could, Tabinda, may I ask you please to begin, and then Alan, and then Esther, I'd love you to give some remarks.
Thank you so much, Vanessa, for that introduction. Please let me know if I'm audible to you at the moment.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Just needed to check on that. So my name is Tabinda Sarosh, and I'm the president for Pathfinder International in South Asia and MENA region. And before that, I was serving as the country director for Pathfinder in Pakistan. And I would love to take a few moments just to talk a little bit about our work that we are implementing in Pakistan and Bangladesh with the generous support of Takeda. And the project is aiming to advance women and girls' leadership towards resilience for climate change on one hand, and on the other, the health system's resilience itself. Evidence and practice have indicated that health systems work around the nexus of supply, demand, and contextual factors. And for that, a larger shift in approaches, as Vanessa, you just rightly said, is required. A shift in paradigm of sorts. Health systems are evolving at very different paces across the world and are fragile in low and middle income countries and are susceptible to becoming overwhelmed, losing the ability to respond to expected or unexpected crises. For women and girls' health, the climate change has disproportionate effects, some of which we are trying to address through our project. These are around unmet need for contraception, discontinuation of education, child or early age marriages, vulnerability to gender-based violence. The recent floods in Pakistan have also been linked to climate change. The enormous scale of the floods has challenged the already fragile health systems like never before. And services for women and girls have been severely impacted. And that is the gendered approach which we take towards the issues through our project, which is being supported by Takeda, to address diversity, equity, and inclusion issues. We are channeling insights from the communities, looping them back into the systems for direct insights from the community-based organizations and women groups, as well as facilitating women's agency to access health services, to work with each other in a peer-to-peer modality, do local resource management, and at the other end with the health systems in looking at capacity in a different way, in a not your usual business as usual way. Because when we talk about health systems resilience, we are talking about regular disruptions that occur and not just one-off crises situation. As you mentioned, Vanessa, we are living in a pandemic. Our health systems are already recovering, from that first overwhelming of the systems, and now climate change. So in Pakistan and Bangladesh, through this project, our objectives are to empower women and girls in low resource communities with tools, knowledge, connections, and resources to survive and thrive. Secondly, and I won't take any more time, I would love to hear what Alan has to say. We also aim to build resilient, adaptable health systems, which are able to meet the health needs of low resource communities and withstand emergency shocks. And last but not least, to learn from everybody. There's so much to learn, and develop an integrated collaboration, learning, and adaptation system to provide evidence for decision-making and lessons for advocacy and social change. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Alan.
A great start, and thank you for the invitation and the chance to speak. Alan Brooks, and I'm a nurse. I'm a PhD in epidemiology, and I am, as many of you here, committed to the impact and the aspiration that Takeda has brought with its investments in development and in the global community. So I'm really pleased at Bridges to Development to be part of this. We're a small nonprofit organization. We're working to advance economic and social well-being, especially for women and girls, by supporting opportunities to overcome health and education barriers. I think small doesn't necessarily mean small in ambition or impact. Our team comes from previous roles in some of the largest development organizations the last 20 years, including the Global Fund, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and I was the Director for Health Systems and Immunization Strengthening in Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. So we actually, as a small organization, we think very big. And one of the lessons and thinkings we've had recently is from COVID and how much it's reminded us that, in fact, infectious diseases can't be taken for granted. And through our work with Takeda, through our support from them, we're bringing a new focus in challenging settings of the Asia Pacific on diseases like yaws, scabies, intestinal worms, and leprosy. These are diseases that high-income countries have largely overcome, so they tend to overlook elsewhere. And even in low resource settings, these diseases have the largest health impact on the most neglected populations. If you think about it, neglect amplifies inequities in health and already stretched and fragile health systems. So Bridges is really pleased to be working with the governments of Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea to rethink how to address these 5 diseases at once, how community-wide and community-driven prevention and treatment with medicines can be undertaken. And we're doing this in close partnership with groups like the World Health Organization, the Kirby Institute at the University of New South Wales, and Case Western University. So there's 2 threads I'd like to call out from the work that we've been supported to undertake with 2 countries. First is the focus on community and health system-driven integration of services. Integration has been a buzzword for many, many years, and yet how to bring it to life, how to make it real has not always been so clear and so easy. So we've been supporting the governments to plan and implement community-wide administration of medicines. But in planning this and thinking about it, how to approach it, we started the process by discussing how do we implement this in the most efficient and effective manner within fragile health systems. What is most respectful of community members and their time? What really meets them where they want such services to be? And this brought us to an integrated approach, something that really hasn't been done before, bringing the targeting of 5 diseases and integrating the services around those into one portfolio and set of activities. So I think integration can be done. It has to be done grounded in communities, grounded in health systems, but actually it can become more than just a buzzword. The second idea I want to put out there as part of sustainability, and particularly taking forward the diversity, equity, inclusion, is rethinking and diversing our assumptions about knowledge. As we've been supporting the ministries to strengthen their community and their referral systems, it's been very clear that actually the amount of existing knowledge within the health system, within the frontline health workers, within nurses is immense. It's really immense. And so when we began discussing with the ministry about the type of training and capacity development and other approaches needed, it became very much a focus on how do we strengthen a peer-to-peer network, and one that relies on the experience of the existing nurses and health workers and builds upon and really values that, as opposed to focusing on an external person conveying knowledge and passing knowledge to those that are really dealing with services on frontline. We implemented the first training, and actually the health workers, before they left, they liked it so much that they put their own plan together for how to scale up activities across all of Vanuatu. That intrinsic motivation and no local knowledge really can be a powerful, powerful driver for change and for amplifying the right for voices to sustain health services, even in fragile settings. And that is the path we're on. We've had tens of thousands of people that have already been treated and who had preventive treatment with medicines for these 5 diseases. And we're very confident that going forward through the integration and valuing of health worker experience, that we're going to be contributing to sustainable improvements in health systems as well. So thank you. Back to you, Vanessa.
Thank you. Esther, I'd love to get your thoughts and to have you share a little bit about how your work has been, I think, important to creating a pathway to diversity, equity, inclusion.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, and thank you very much, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. It's raining out here. It's very dark in Uganda, but I'm very happy to be here. And thank you, my fellow panelists, Tavinda and Alan, for the stage you have set. As journalists, and obviously as a journalist working in Uganda and in Africa, it's something that we are looking at. Health systems is something that we are looking at. We are looking at, we are looking at how health systems are performing in light of the pandemic and in light of what we have all gone through, and in light of the reigning diseases that we are going through right now, monkeypox, we have yellow fever outbreak right now in Uganda, we have so many things that are ongoing. It is important that we look at health equity, we look at inclusivity, we look at the workforce that is taking on all of this. And as journalists, we are also looking at leadership. Camila has talked about women and leadership, and that is something that is so important. We also look at genderizing some of these things. And in our work as journalists, we look at voices that are coming out of the work that programs such as the ones that have been highlighted are doing, and we give voices to people who are doing this. And we can only do this if the programs actually look at the inclusivity of these people. So it is something that, that is key, that is important. And to us as journalists, it is something that we want to push forward and put out there. The other thing that I think is important in terms of health systems strengthening is for us as local people, as Africans, as journalists, to push for investment in health system strengthening. It is so good that the outside, Takeda is funding programs, it's putting in money, but we have to push our governments. We have to push ourselves to also invest in these health systems so that they work sustainably. It is not anybody else to come in and do these things for us. We have to give voices. We have to put in our voices so that they are heard. We have to say what we have to say so that people hear us and act. Health equity requires us to look through a local lens. These people, there are people who are doing things locally, and these people have to be looked at and supported and amplified. Their voices have to be amplified so that our own governments actually invest in these things. So conclusively, I think what we have had, integrating all these things coming together, putting out knowledge, giving the voiceless voices is something that we have to do. Over to you, Vanessa.
Thank you. I want to pick up on that theme a little bit and broaden it to some degree, in the sense that you speak about our own accountability as individuals in this entire equation, and how we must all participate in creating a change and pushing for the kind of work and way that we want this to happen. But I think we have to be very candid for a moment that a lot of the global health agenda is being driven by certain entities or certain sectors, like the donors or bilateral governments that drive a huge amount of getting their own, being able to kind of report back on achievement, and that creates a dynamic where sometimes it is hard to be able to speak to or to create that system. And so I guess a question that I'm going to ask both Tabinda and Alan, please, to comment on is how do our behaviors in different sectors have to change? So, for example, we know that there's a traditional model of funding that can have very negative implications for, as we're talking about today, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the local voices, because it doesn't incentivize necessarily I guess it would say it doesn't allow for the priorities or kind of that longer term sustainability. Funding cycles are short, or there's a different agenda being driven by those donors, for example. And so, how could, for example, donors go beyond a singular approach and or reposition their own strategies, knowing that they are such power holders in this agenda? Equally, journalists are big power holders. They decide what we read and what we write, or sort of what we read and what we respond to and what dominates our news. Or how do we how do we sort of change? So how do we change those behaviors for DEI, for that health system strengthening? And who are the big power players that maybe need to rethink their approach? Alan, do you want to start?
Sure, I'll start, and I'll give 2 examples again to get to the how instead of just being stuck at the challenge of sort of the development.
Yeah, I want solutions. Fix this.
Yes, exactly. The first is who we collectively, we the international development community, choose to listen to, and whose voices we choose to really hear. You say hear with the capital H. So one of the collaborations we have that I mentioned, using peer-to-peer as a way of amplifying the voices of nurses in Vanuatu and train other nurses instead of having doctors, fly in and do the training. And Tabinda also referenced peer-to-peer. Well, we've been working with a group called the Geneva Learning Foundation to take that to scale. In a 4-month course we had focused on immunization activities, we had over 4,000 frontline, mostly subnational, mostly Ministry of Health staff that went through a process of working together to look at, in their own context, what are the challenges that they individually are facing within their sphere of control, to develop a small set of activities that they can actually use to address that challenge, and then to support each other and work with each other to implement those pieces. So in a virtual world, in a digital world, it is possible to take peer-to-peer to scale. It is happening at the level of not just 10s and 20s, but at the thousands and tens of thousands. And those are some of the opportunities. If we want to listen to those voices then, who are saying, this is the problem in my environment, community, and I would like to work on solving this, and these are the information and pieces I need, and I want to go, and I'm not looking for just a lot more resources. That window is out there now. That's an example of happening. I've got another example, but I'll pause there as one solution to bringing the right, let's say, a new set of voices into the development equation to really amplify those that I think are going to be central to driving the sustained changes, to have that intrinsic motivation to drive sustained changes because they're trying to make changes in their own communities. They are making changes in their own communities. Back to you.
Thank you. Tabinda, thoughts?
Thank you. And thank you, Ellen, for starting us off in the direction. I think, it is also stemming up from what we are witnessing on the ground, right? And those are the insights and intel which need to be channeled across to multiple stakeholders and, the high power decision makers, as you mentioned, Vanessa. So, for example, in times of need, whether it's a crisis, a one-off disruption, or a continuous series of disruption, what are the needs that we are expecting, that our health systems need to step forward and fulfill? One, we need to have the capacity to identify the areas of strengthening, and that requires data and insights from the systems and the people. Then the ability to ensure continuity of services in such circumstances and safeguarding the supply chains. And here come in the big decision makers on supply chain, on commodity security. And then the ability to retain and train staff and resources for immediate deployment, coordinating with multi-sectoral actors and fostering relationships and partnerships to work together. And last but not least, supporting government systems to work across the sectors to share information across ministries and programs, and early on involve communities at a level which is higher than routine level. Often we talk about community engagement and involvement, but at this time we have no room to let this get diluted. I do think that donors are becoming more and more conscious of the needs as well. For example, I was going through USAID's latest vision for health systems is strengthening, which emphasizes upon resilience built upon equity, quality, and resource optimization. The Gates Foundation's, funded work on family planning in Pakistan through Pathfinder also factored in essential multi-sectoral elements in project design and intended outcomes. And then last but not least, what we are doing with Takeda's support in Bangladesh and Pakistan is an excellent example of that emphasis and that shift in narrative. However, at the moment, of course, as you said, we are at the beginning of this, and we need to act very fast. And this would include partnerships, not just with the governments, but with the communities, with the decision makers in the communities when it comes to girls' sexual and reproductive health, also with men and boys as allies, and champions of that. Women and girls are bearing the brunt of climate change effects, extreme heat, drought, flooding in different contexts, and they also present great potential for developing solutions as health systems and vulnerable communities work together to adapt and to co-create. So I think all these, it would be very hard to say which stakeholder has more weight in this equation. Obviously, we all need funds to program, but Pathfinder, leaning back on our history of programming based on the insights from the community, hopes to continue doing just that. Thank you.
Thank you, both. And I think as we predicted, I knew I was getting, your responses have covered, I want to keep digging deeper actually into a lot of things you're talking about, because I feel like you're scratching the surface of these critically important topics. And so for the audience, I would offer that this is the beginning of what should be our exploration as a group, as individuals, about some of these topics. And I do want to invite the audience, by the way, we will move into a Q&A, and as you're formulating your questions and using the Q&A function, I would ask you to please write any questions that you have, and would love to draw on those to ask the panelists. I have another question for the panelists as folks write in their questions. One note as you write in your questions, any questions specific to Takeda will be answered later in this session in the RFP. I'd love to keep questions kind of focused on this discussion about how DEI can really, really be able to, really create that pathway to health system strengthening. And I'm going to ask again, a bit of a two-part question that I would love. I'd actually like Esther, if you don't mind, sort of beginning with a response. But I think one of the things that we've touched on is the need for local priorities, local voices, local leadership to come forth. And, how do we ensure that those voices are included? How do we really amplify the expertise of our partners on the ground and make sure that they are upheld at the front end of these conversations? We're going into UNGA next week, which is an opportunity for people to convene. But that convening is often dictated about whether or not you could pay for travel. Do you have a visa? Are you vaccinated? So the conversation in person is automatically already shrunk. You are a storyteller by the nature of your job. You are accountable to share so much. So I'd love to hear from you, Esther, about how do we ensure that those voices are in place? How do we bring this forth for health system strengthening, especially as we look to next week?
You actually speak to something that is happening to me right now, because I'm supposed to be in New York next week to cover for one of my outlets, the UN summit, but I don't have a visa yet, and I don't think I'll get any anyway. So the issue of inclusiveness is also what you have highlighted, Vanessa. We feel like the Western, no, let me not phrase it that way. We have to have our voices heard, but we also need a playing field where everybody has the opportunity to feed into this. If I cannot get a vaccine, if I can't access a vaccine, then I can't get on the plane, like you say. If I cannot get a visa, like the dilemma I'm in right now, I cannot write anything for my audiences back home. So I think it is more, it's something that needs a holistic approach, not a small targeted approach, but a bigger holistic approach where things are looked at differently from all angles, so that everybody plugs in and everybody's heard and knowledge is shared and people are considered. It's not for one part of the world to know what to do, or to have all these this say to strengthening this. Local voices have to be heard. People here have to be heard. We have to be given opportunities to say what we have to say. But in order to do that, systems have to be strengthened. People have, we have to strengthen certain things that enable us to be seen and known. And
can I push you on that? Like what? Can you give concrete examples? I want to make sure that we're pulling out. I'd love to hear. And, I want to really give guidance to some of these folks in the audience about what does that look like? What are those pieces?
In terms of journalism right now, we need things like, typically what we need from the local people is data. If data is missing, if I'm writing a story and I can't find data, how do I measure your success? How do I know how far you have gone? This data has to be updated. It has to be up to date. It has to be aligned to a common, value that everybody has to understand. So some of the things that we need as journalists, as local people here are not really so grand or so big. We need things that are consistent, that are measurable, that bring us to a common goal, and we understand that we are being included, we know what is going on, and we can tell that with this data, with this that is happening, there is success, and it can be measured, and it can be shared, and it can be seen. So yeah, that's my take on that.
It's very helpful. And I appreciate that and I appreciate your sharing I think just the example of what you're struggling with to come to New York as a journalist, as a leader, is very real. So I appreciate your sharing, that aspect of things as well. Alan and David, I'd like you to also, if you don't mind, share sort of maybe some concrete, what does this concretely look like? How do we restructure? What are the practical things though that could happen off the bat?
Something that at Pathfinder we have been experiencing again and again is that what works best is always to work with the communities. And in countries, it's our main priority is to actually activate, facilitate, and elevate our local partners. Many of them are community-based organizations. These community-based organizations do not have a very large operational structure, but they reside in the heart of the communities, and they, and working through them within the communities, with the insights emerging from the communities, bridging them to the health systems is one of the approaches that works very well for us. Secondly, to work with youth champions. In many countries, in my region, youth are a very major emerging demographics, and youth are helping shape the narrative. And working with youth, especially on contraception, on areas around difficult areas, in some contexts like sexual and reproductive health, it's very important to engage very early on and build that narrative. Thirdly, it's very important to work at the highest policy echelons. Some of our experiences of working with policy around climate change policy have indicated that women and girls issues are often overlooked, when policy is being devised. Climate change, for example, is sometimes considered in silos, as is health in certain conditions. And Pathfinder is playing that role to kind of make those channels, make those bridges between the different sectors to be able to be talking to each other. I think the spirit behind is the move towards localization, decision-making near the country. That's another thing that Pathfinder has been very vociferously, pioneering, which is country-led leadership, country-led decision-making, so that something very equivalent to what Esther just said, that at the end of the day, that's where the solutions also rise. So those are some things. Last but not least, because I am working in SRHR and for maternal neonatal health, most of the providers in this sector are women. You know, the community health workers are women, the lady health visitors and at the basic health units are women, and to understand providers and their own, their own limitations, their own considerations, their overwhelming, the gendered biases that women as providers, as health managers have to, face as they navigate in the health systems. So this is an area where the major clientele is also women and girls, and the major service providers are also women and girls. And this is where we need to be working on taking integrated and gender transformative lens towards the entire system. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan, I want to have you actually take a stab. There's quite a few questions here that we're seeing from the audience that are really focusing on sort of how do we, this goes back to the question of how do we create some of this actual change, right? So one is, what is the scope and role of the private sector in health system strengthening? I think is an important question, and mechanisms of CSR, for example. There's a second question that asks about how do we really move the needle on reshaping the agenda for health system strengthening? There's been a lot of peer-to-peer examples given, but how do we create that accountability for the donors and the entities who are shaping the agenda to understand what these countries and these peer groups need, which would also relate to how do community health workers have a voice and play and bring some strength and get heard in this. And so I think I'm keeping this intentionally broad because I think there's a lot of richness in these questions, but they're somewhat related about that action. And so as we look to the UNGA, how do we make sure the leaders really commit to action, not just comment on it? How do we make sure, again, that their private sector, what is the role the private sector could play, and how could they probably help be an engine in that? So Alan, I'm going to give you that broad question, and then to Binda, I might have you make a comment, and then I know we're going to run out of time, so I'm just going to call it ahead of time. But please, Alan.
Sure. So I'll take on the private sector very briefly, because to me, it's such a non-negotiable. Health services around the world would shut down tomorrow if the private sector walked away. So it's a question of how do we work together? How do we play to each other's strengths? How do we bridge what each is good at? Not how do we see one as a threat or an opponent to the other. We have to work together. We need each other. So how we do that depends on the context and the situation and otherwise. The other piece around healthcare workers and voices and sort of how do those come into the development agenda? We've kind of created the development space that we live in. And it goes partially back to one of your original questions, which is, what are the things, for example, that the major and most influential funding streams out there value, prioritize, center their energy onto? If you look at the report that's just out from the Global Fund yesterday, I believe, very compelling reading, and all of it is around essentially number of people on antiretroviral treatment in the HIV space, or number of people receiving, malaria medicine. So that's fabulous. That is absolutely wonderful, because 20 years ago, how many people were on ARVs? Virtually none. So the question is, and how do we do that and create space for people, for example, dealing with the mental health issues associated with living with HIV and the social stigma with that, to also be supported and treated? Creating the space where the voices of healthcare workers that are particularly community healthcare workers can be valued and filtered up as organizations like funders or the World Health Organization are setting policy. How many women, how many nurses are part of the global policy agenda setting scene in Geneva? How many nurses work with the World Health Organization in Geneva? Things like that are questions we need to ask ourselves about the voices that then can be driving these things. And a very last example, again, going to the large funding mechanisms as key drivers of this, is having them create spaces for looking at the next two as opposed to the direct treatments that are coming out. And here we have 50 to 60 million women in Africa who are living with female genital schistosomiasis. This was essentially ignored for decades. It was just neglected by the international community. And yet, what do we realize now through recent studies? Women that have female genital schistosomiasis, so a parasitic infection in their urogenital area, have a threefold risk of transmission of HIV, of contracting HIV. So that space, it's not the classic space for something like the Global Fund to support and invest in, but yet by engaging around issues around sexual and reproductive health, around neglected tropical diseases, it's actually a win-win-win. Those are ways, if we really hear what's affecting communities, try and amplify those voices, I think we can glue some of these pieces together more than maybe we have in the past. Sorry, big question.
It's a huge question, but I wanted it to be intentionally broad to allow it. To Binda, I'd love you to maybe answer in that big question, the one thing you think that you'd really like to highlight right now. And then I'm afraid we'll have to come to our conclusion. And there's a lot of really extraordinary questions that we might attempt to try to type in answers to, because thank you for everyone's participation.
Thank you, Vanessa. I guess I'll just like to start by saying ditto to everything that Alan just said, because that's really what's happening. When we talk about DEI, we're actually talking about those populations which have been marginalized, historically vulnerable, right? And in a way, systematically invisibilized, right? And maybe our job is to visibilize them. When we talk about voices and amplification of voices, where are we identifying those voices from? You know, are we working in a project modality only, you know, to check certain boxes in the LFAs, or are we actually going deep inside, finding where the vulnerabilities are and making sure that we are bringing them to fore and addressing them. I think that is the core of programming needs going forward. One last thing that I want to say is also thinking out of the box, how the world is not the same as we see it. It wasn't, you know, even if we just go back 2 years ago, it was a different world. What has happened? What has changed? How the needs are increasing, the resources are getting limited. And at that time, what different entry points do we have? I do feel digital space, our programming and evidence is telling us that digital space is a great entry point to reach out to people in a multi-level, multi-channel modality, you know, to form and design, you know, effective SBCC approaches, effective approaches around awareness raising and connecting women and girls to services. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank our panelists for, I think, tackling some, I think, the most fundamental and critical questions that we face in the health community for this moment. And I would add that health is truly fundamental. So the how we strengthen health systems, build that horizontal resilience, de-silo our approaches to disease, and elevate in very concrete ways the voices of our partners, and actually create that commitment, right? I really appreciate the question about not just talk, but commitment, because in the work that we do at SEED, which is focused on health, on human resource capacity and training healthcare workers to fill the gaps that exist locally, you know, 180,000 healthcare workers have died in COVID alone as of November of last year. It's taken SEED 8 years to train close to, 9 years to train close to 40,000 healthcare workers. That's a tiny fraction of those that died in a single year. So we have to find a way, I think, to really answer these questions and to build out these horizontal solutions in order to be able to have a different kind of resilience for the moments we face. So I would encourage everyone who has participated in this to see this as the beginning of a really critical series of questions and our own commitments to action, so that when we go into conversations next week, as we go into conversations beyond next week, we are asking that exact question. How do we get commitment to change? How do we get people to really invest in a healthcare workforce, or to invest in the local partnerships, or to elevate those voices and to change the paradigms and structures that we see? And I want to thank these panelists for the work that their organizations are doing, their partners are doing, the leadership that you're demonstrating, and for being in this really critical fight in this moment that we have in time. And with that, I'm going to pass this conversation back to Claire, and just to say thank you I've been writing down everything for starting a really important pathway forward for all of us to carry ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Vanessa, and all our speakers for really thoughtful perspectives and conversations. And as you note, Vanessa, this is the beginning of a conversation we will all be having pretty consistently for a long time. And we thank you all for being a part of it. I encourage everyone in the audience to explore our speakers' projects and organizations to find out more and keep this conversation going forward. And we will take note of all these amazing questions and see how we can reconvene, how we can respond, how we can keep that flowing. Now I'm really excited to turn to our announcements. I know that Takeda is truly grateful for all the organizations that submitted proposals to last year's RFP and that the selection of awardees was not easy. I'm very pleased to introduce Ruth Musila, Takeda's Health Systems Liaison Lead for Sub-Saharan Africa, joining us from Kenya to make the worldwide announcement to all of us here today, including Takeda employees. And following the announcement, I'll ask a representative from each awardee organization to make a brief statement. Ruth, I give you the microphone.
Thank you, Claire. And hello, everyone. As Health Systems Liaison for Takeda in Sub-Saharan Africa and a global health advocate with a pharmacy background, I'm acutely aware of the concrete difference that strong health systems make for individuals, families, and communities. It was very special to participate alongside 34 other colleagues in this year's selection of Takeda's Global CSR Program Finalists as a member of our application review committee. We were all inspired by the depth and creativity of every organization and proposed project. It is an affirmation that the world has a committed, brilliant group of organizations that are working tirelessly to transform global health. In addition to helping select finalists, I also cast my vote in our company-wide employee vote. And now I am honored and very excited to announce the 2022 awardees, the results of that employee vote. On behalf of my 51,000 colleagues across 80 countries, I am pleased to announce the 4 long-term projects and organizations that Takeda is honored to partner with. First, we are delighted to partner with IPAS on a 4-year project to improve access to and use of comprehensive sexual and reproductive health services for hard-to-reach women and girls in Ethiopia, Indonesia, and Pakistan. Second, we're thrilled to partner with Plan International to improve access to health services for marginalized populations, especially girls and women experiencing complications from female genital mutilation or FGM in rural areas of Somalia. Third, we're very happy to partner with Pure Earth to identify, monitor, treat, and reduce childhood lead poisoning from lead exposure in Colombia, India, Kyrgyzstan, and Peru. And finally, we are delighted to partner with UNFPA to transform case management support available for survivors of gender-based violence in Azerbaijan, El Salvador, Indonesia, Madagascar, and Zimbabwe. A hearty congratulations to our 2022 partners. We'll hear directly from them in just a minute. All of Takeda's employees are thrilled to welcome you to the Global CSR Program family. We're looking forward to learning from you and hearing about the impact we know your projects will make. Thank you. Claire, I hand the back over to you.
Thank you, Ruth, and congratulations to our Takeda's newest Global CSR Program partners. And now we have an opportunity to hear from these organizations about what this new long-term support from Takeda makes possible. I'd like to ask Marsha Sumokil from IPAS Indonesia to go first. Marsha, could you tell us what's possible for your work with this new partnership?
I'm Marcia Somokil, Director of IPAS Indonesia. Comprehensive reproductive health care and the ability to control your own fertility is of global importance. For women and girls, it's life-changing. Without this essential care, their health, well-being, education, and job prospects suffer. In my country and around the world, this is a reality. But through our partnership with Takeda, we can improve access to reproductive health services here in Indonesia, in Ethiopia, and in Pakistan. And we know that this work will truly improve the health and well-being of women and girls, their families, and their communities. We are delighted to work with Takeda. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I will ask Sadia Aline from Plan International Somalia and Somaliland to tell us what Takeda's long-term support makes possible for your work. Sadia, the mic is yours.
Thank you so much. I can hardly get enough words to express my appreciation. I'm truly moved by the humanity that has crossed the thousands of miles, mountains and seas between Japan and Somalia. FGM implication does not end at the instant pain, but it is a lifetime torture. Somalia has the highest prevalence of FGM. 98% of our girls are cut. With this project, it will protect the dignity for FGM survivors. In marginalized areas, IDP camps, delivering dignified, equitable health care, including FGM implication treatment. With this project, we will gather necessary information, evidence to develop national standards and clinical guidelines for FGM. We want with Takeda to create a world where girls and women can decide their own future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sadia. And I'm now pleased to ask Budi Susilorini, Director at Pure Earth, to speak. Budi, please tell us about your program.
Hello, let me begin by saying thank you. Pure Earth is honored by your faith in us and by your commitment to address childhood lead poisoning, which impacts 800 million children globally. With this award, we will help protect children across Colombia, India, Kyrgyzstan, Peru, and Indonesia from the devastation of lead poisoning. I've been working with communities in Indonesia to solve pollution for 18 years. More than 36 million Indonesian children are lead poisoned, and I have seen lead's devastating impact on a child's life. With your support, we will work with the Ministry of Health to improve its capacity to identify and prevent childhood lead exposures. We will also raise awareness around the dangers of lead exposure and how to avoid it through an education program for teachers and families. Terima kasih.
Thank you so much, Budi. And finally, I'd love to invite Anjali Sen from UNFPA to describe what is now possible as a result of UNFPA's partnership with Takeda.
On behalf of everyone at UNFPA, I want to express our sincere gratitude and appreciation to the employees of Takeda for casting their vote for this very important project. Gender-based violence is one of the most prevalent human rights violations affecting 1 in 3 women globally. Victims often face significant barriers to finding the help they need. Over the next 4 years, we will scale up our fight against the pandemic of violence against women and girls and provide specialized protection and response services in countries like Azerbaijan, El Salvador, here in Indonesia, Madagascar, and Zimbabwe. Every woman and girl has the right to live her life free of harm and fear so that they can realize their full potential. Together, we can move closer to making this a reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Anjali, and thank you, Marcia, Sadia, and Budi for sharing this background on your new partnerships. And now I'd like to ask Ms. Toshie Ando, Head of Global CSR Strategy and Partnerships for Takeda, to share more about the next RFP. Toshie, please give us a preview of what to expect when.
Thank you, Claire, and congratulations again to all our new partners. Now, as promised, I'm delighted to announce the launch of our Global CSR Program 2023 Public RFP, the request for proposal. The RFP document will be released on the Apply for Funding page of our Takeda website on September 14th by 9 a.m. Japan time, just tomorrow. This document contains extensive guidance and our application form template. Our online system is always open for registration, and on the 14th, registered organizations will be able to start filling out applications for the RFP cycle. Applications will be due on October 21st. Health system strengthening will remain our foundational mission for this RFP, but we especially invite proposals that spotlight sustainability and DE&I as a core focus to those health system strengthening projects. We will also hold another webinar dedicated to the RFP and to answering questions about the application on September 28. We're grateful that so many organizations with such exciting experience, work, and insight have joined us today and are considering applying. Thank you. Back to you, Claire.
Thank you, Toshe, for the RFP preview. I know many organizations with us today are interested in submitting proposals and really care deeply about all the issues we're discussing. To our audience, thank you for joining. We hope you've come away with a better sense of Takeda's Global CSR program, the work of its partners, and the importance of the connection between health system strengthening, sustainability, and DE&I. Vanessa, Tabinda, Esther, and Alan, thank you so much for sharing your insights and experience. The work you and your organizations are doing is inspiring and clearly making an impact. Ruth, we really appreciate your showcasing the passion and enthusiasm of Takeda employees for global health. And congratulations again to Takeda's new awardees. To everyone attending, please stay tuned for an invitation later this week to Takeda's September 28th RFP webinar, where you'll be able to connect with proposal reviewers. And don't forget to check out the new RFP when it goes live tomorrow. A final animated note of thanks from Takeda will formally close our event with a reminder on screen about key dates and milestones and links. And then finally, just note that when you close the webinar window, you'll see a link to a very brief survey about your impressions of today and what you'd like to see in the future. And we'd be really grateful if you could spend a minute and a half filling that out. Thank you so much again to everyone who joined us here today for your time.